My sister Claire called me crying in April, the kind of crying that comes with hiccups between words, the kind that makes you brace yourself before you even know what's wrong. "We have to sell the beach house," she said. "I can't afford the taxes anymore, and I can't afford to keep pretending I can." I sat down on my kitchen floor, phone pressed so hard against my ear it left a mark, and let her cry, because that's what you do for your sister, even when the house in question is the one place that still smells like our mother. I should explain about the house because it isn't just a house, not to either of us. It sits on a narrow spit of land on the Carolina coast, cedar shingled and salt bleached, the kind of place that looks like it's been standing since before anyone thought to zone the coastline. Our parents bought it the year I was born, back when it was cheap and unfashionable and the town down the road was still mostly a gas station and a bait shop. I grew up learning to swim off that dock. Claire learned to drive on the sandy access road behind it, grinding our father's truck through the ruts until he finally let her take the wheel on real pavement. Every summer of my childhood ends, in memory, at that house. Citronella candles, my mother's terrible sunburns, the particular sound the screen door made when it slapped shut behind us running for the water. Our mother died 6 years ago, quickly and without much warning, the way a heart just stops sometimes when you least expect the story to end there. Our father had gone 2 years before that, so when she went, the house became, officially, legally, ours. Both of ours. That's what the will said, in the flat, tired language wills always use. To my daughters, Claire and Renata, in equal share, the property at 214 Gull Point Road. Except equal share, in practice, meant something very different than it meant on paper. Claire lived 40 minutes from the coast, in the same town she'd settled in after college, close enough to drive down on weekends and handle whatever the house needed. I lived 9 hours away, in a city with a job that ate my calendar whole, a marriage that was unraveling in slow motion at the time, and a grief so raw about our mother that I genuinely could not make myself get in a car and drive toward a place so soaked in her. So Claire did what Claire always does. She quietly took it on. She hired someone to check the crawl space every year for moisture, because coastal houses rot from underneath if you're not paying attention. She dealt with the insurance adjuster after the hurricane clipped us in 2020 and took part of the roof with it. She found a contractor, negotiated the estimate down, supervised the work over 3 exhausting weekends while also raising 2 kids and holding down her own job as a school counselor, a job that pays enough to be meaningful and not nearly enough to be comfortable. She paid the property taxes every year out of an account she never once asked me to contribute to unless I offered first, and even then she'd take only half of what I offered, saying she didn't want it to feel unbalanced. I sent money when she asked, which wasn't often, and I stayed away the rest of the time, because going back to that house without our mother in it felt like walking into a room where the furniture had been rearranged by grief, familiar enough to recognize, wrong enough to make your stomach drop every time you turned a corner expecting her voice and got silence instead. Claire never made me feel guilty about that distance. She never once said you should come down more, you should help more, this isn't fair. She just quietly carried it, the way she carried everything, the way she'd carried our mother's decline in her final year while I was 9 hours away pretending a work trip was the reason I couldn't come sooner. I used to tell myself the arrangement made sense. Claire got the day-to-day burden, sure, but she also got the actual use of the place. Her family spent 2 weeks there every August. Her kids had their own version of the citronella and screen door summers I'd had at their age. I got to keep the house in my life as an idea, a place I couldn't quite face but also couldn't imagine losing, without doing any of the unglamorous work of keeping it standing. It wasn't equal. I knew it wasn't equal. I just never let myself sit with that knowledge long enough to feel the full weight of it. The taxes had been climbing for 3 years. Coastal property values doing what coastal property values do. The assessor's office recalculating every cycle as more people discovered our unfashionable little stretch of beach and decided it was fashionable after all. Claire mentioned it once, last Thanksgiving, in the careful, glancing way she brought up anything that might sound like a complaint. "The taxes on the house went up again," she said, passing the potatoes. "It's getting to be a lot." I said something useless, like we should really look at doing a formal cost split, and then I let the conversation move on to my nephew's soccer season, and I never followed up because following up would have meant admitting how little I actually understood about what she was managing. By April, apparently, a lot had become too much. She told me later that the property tax bill that spring had jumped almost 40% from the year before, on top of a new insurance requirement after 2 other houses on the point had flooded during a bad nor'easter, on top of a foundation issue the crawlspace inspector had flagged that would run at least $12,000 to fix properly. She'd been quietly juggling all of it alone for months before she finally called me, and when she did call, it wasn't to ask for money. It was to tell me she'd already decided. She couldn't keep doing this by herself, and she wasn't going to ask me to suddenly start doing my share after 6 years of not asking, and so the only fair thing, the only thing that let her stop feeling like she was drowning slowly in an aging house 9 hours from her sister's attention, was to sell it. I found a realtor, she said, once the crying had settled into something steadier, something almost businesslike, the tone she probably used with parents in her office delivering hard news about their kids. Her name's Denise. She's coming Thursday to do a valuation before we list it. I just need you to sign off on the sale when the time comes. Of course, I said, and I meant it, even though something in my chest twisted at the thought of that house belonging to someone else, some family who'd never known our mother's laugh carrying across the dunes at dusk. Whatever you need. We talked another few minutes, logistics mostly, whether I wanted anything from inside the house before it went on the market, whether I'd want to come down for one last weekend before strangers started walking through the rooms with a checklist and a clipboard. I told her I'd think about it. I hung up and sat on the kitchen floor a while longer, phone dark in my hand, grieving a house I hadn't set foot in for 3 years, as though the decision to sell it had somehow made it more mine again, now that it was already slipping away. Thursday afternoon, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize, area code matching the coast, and I almost let it go to voicemail before some instinct made me pick up. Thursday afternoon, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. A woman introduced herself as Denise, the realtor, calling to confirm details before the walkthrough. I just want to make sure I have this right, she said, papers rustling on her end. According to the county records, you're listed as the sole owner of the property. Your sister mentioned you both inherited it, but the deed transfer 5 years ago only shows your name. I'm sorry, say that again? You're the owner of record, Denise said, slower this time, like she thought I might be hard of hearing instead of simply stunned. Sole owner. Since 2021. I didn't say anything for so long that she asked if we'd gotten disconnected. No, I finally managed. I'm here. There must be some kind of clerical error. My sister and I inherited that house jointly. It's in both our names. I'm looking at the recorded deed right now, Denise said, not unkindly, but with the patient firmness of someone who dealt in public record, not family assumption. There was a quitclaim deed filed in March of 2021, transferring the property from joint ownership, Renata and Claire, as it lists you both, into sole ownership under your name only. Renata Marsh. That's you, correct? That's me. My voice came out strange, distant, like I was listening to someone else answer for me. But I never signed anything like that. I would remember signing something like that. There was a pause on her end, the kind of pause professionals learn to use when a conversation has just veered somewhere they didn't expect and don't necessarily want to be the one steering. I only work off what's recorded at the courthouse, she said carefully. I'm not able to speak to how it got filed, only that it's filed. You might want to look into that before we move forward with anything. I can hold off on the valuation visit until you and your sister sort out the ownership question. I told her that would be good, that I needed a few days, and I hung up and sat with my phone in my lap for what felt like a very long time, the kind of stillness where your own house goes quiet around you because your brain has stopped registering ordinary sound. My first thought, absurdly, was that I'd forgotten something. That somewhere in the blur of the year after our mother died, a year I remember mostly as fog, my marriage collapsing in the background while I flew back and forth for the funeral, and then these state meetings, and then nothing, silence, both of us retreating into our separate lives. I must have signed paperwork I didn't fully register signing. Estate transfers involve so much paper. Maybe there'd been a document among the stack the estate attorney had me sign. Something routine-looking that I'd initialed without reading closely because I trusted the process, trusted my sister, trusted that nobody in my family would engineer something like this behind my back. But the more I sat with it, the less that explanation held together. A quitclaim deed isn't something that happens by accident, buried in a stack of estate paperwork. It requires an actual filing, an actual signature, an actual notarization. Someone has to physically stand in front of a notary and sign their name away from a piece of property. I hadn't done that. I would have remembered doing that the way you remember the specific, deliberate motions of giving something up. I called Claire. She didn't pick up. I called again 20 minutes later, and this time she answered, sounding harried, kids audible somewhere behind her, the clatter of an ordinary Thursday evening. Hey, sorry, we're in the middle of dinner chaos. What's up? Denise called me, I said. The realtor. Oh, good. Did she confirm Thursday still works? I wanted to make sure the walkthrough. Claire. I heard my own voice come out flatter than I meant it to, cutting through whatever logistics she was about to launch into. She said the house is in my name. Solely. Since 2021. A quitclaim deed. The silence on her end was different from Denise's professional pause. This one had weight to it, the particular density of a silence where someone is deciding, in real time, how much of the truth to give you. I can explain that, Claire said finally, and something in the careful way she said it made my stomach drop before she'd explained anything at all. Please do. She exhaled, and I heard her tell the kids to go finish dinner without her, heard a door close somewhere in her house, the sound of her moving somewhere private. Okay. So, after Mom died, when we were doing the estate stuff, remember how disorganized that whole year was? You were dealing with the divorce filing and I was handling basically everything with the lawyer down here because you couldn't get away. I remember. The estate attorney, Mr. Halloran, you met him twice. He said it would be simpler for tax and insurance purposes if the property was held by one owner instead of two, especially since I was the one actually managing it day to day. He said joint ownership on a property like this creates complications down the line, especially with the mortgage refinance we needed to do because of the roof damage. He drew up a quitclaim deed transferring it into single ownership, and he said it was just a formality, that ownership between us was still 50-50 in spirit, that we'd handle it informally between sisters the way families always do with property like this. Claire. Whose name did he put it in? Another pause, shorter this time, but somehow worse for its brevity. Mine. It was supposed to be in my name. I was the one handling everything. It made sense for me to be the one on paper, and then whenever we actually sold it or whatever, we'd split it evenly, obviously. That was never even a question between us. Then why? I said, very slowly, feeling something cold settle into my chest. Does the county record say it's in mine? The silence this time went on long enough that I actually pulled the phone away from my ear to check the call hadn't dropped. I don't know, Claire said finally, and for the first time in the conversation, she sounded genuinely frightened rather than merely uncomfortable. I don't know how that happened. I signed paperwork Halloran's office sent me. I never once looked at the actual recorded deed after it went through, because why would I? I trusted him. I trusted the whole thing was handled the way he said it would be handled. Who else had access to that paperwork? Who else could have? I stopped myself, because the next word forming in my mouth was a word I didn't want to say to my sister, a word that implied something deliberate, something chosen, and I wasn't ready yet to decide whether that word belonged in this conversation or not. I don't know, she said again, quieter now. But Renata, I need you to believe me. I never tried to take that house from you. I never wanted it in only my name, let alone in only yours. Something went wrong somewhere in that office, or with that file, and I swear to you, I am just as confused right now as you are. I believed her. I want to be clear about that, sitting there in my kitchen with the phone hot against my ear. I believed my sister completely, without hesitation, the way you believe someone who has spent 6 years quietly carrying a burden you barely acknowledged. What I didn't yet understand was who else had touched that deed, and why, and what it might mean that the mistake, if it was a mistake, had landed the entire house, free and clear, in my name alone. I told Claire I'd call Mr. Halloran's office first thing in the morning, and I did, sitting in my car in a parking lot before work because I couldn't make myself wait until I got home. The woman who answered told me Mr. Halloran had retired 18 months earlier and that the practice had been absorbed by a larger firm 2 towns over. She gave me a number for an associate named Priyanka Ose, who now handled the old files, and warned me it might take a few days to pull anything from storage that far back. It took 4 days, and they were among the strangest 4 days of my adult life, a kind of suspended animation where I went to work, answered emails, made dinner, and underneath all of it ran a low hum of dread I couldn't quite name. I wasn't afraid of losing the house. If anything, absurdly, I now legally owned all of it, which should have felt like the opposite of loss. What frightened me was not knowing why, and what frightened me more was the small, ugly voice in the back of my mind that kept asking whether my sister, steady, generous, self-sacrificing Claire, might have had a hand in it after all, whatever she'd said on the phone. Priyanka called on a Tuesday morning. "I found the file," she said. "It's a little bit of a mess, honestly. I want to walk you through what I'm seeing because I think there was an error, and I want to be straightforward with you about that, given that we've absorbed liability for Mr. Halloran's old files." She explained it carefully, in the unhurried tone of someone reading from documents spread in front of her. In March of 2021, her predecessor's office had indeed drafted a quitclaim deed transferring the property from joint ownership between Claire and me into sole ownership, intended, according to the file notes, to be placed in Claire's name only, exactly as Claire had described, in order to simplify a refinance tied to the roof repairs. The deed had been drafted correctly. The notarization had happened correctly, with Claire's signature witnessed properly in the office. But when the paralegal at the time filled out the actual recording paperwork to file with the county clerk, the document that determines what the public record actually says, she had transposed our names. Sole ownership, granted to Renata Marsh, instead of Claire Marsh. "It's a data entry error," Priyanka said. "A bad one, admittedly, given how consequential it is. But that's what it looks like happened. The underlying intent, based on every note in this file, was clearly for the property to transfer into your sister's name. Somebody just typed the wrong sister." I sat with that for a long moment, feeling something in my chest loosen that I hadn't fully realized was clenched. Not relief about the house. I still didn't know, in that moment, what I even wanted regarding the house, but relief about Claire. A clerical error meant nothing had been taken from anyone on purpose. It meant my sister hadn't quietly maneuvered herself, or me, into anything. It meant the ugly little voice in my head could finally be told, definitively, to be quiet. "So what happens now?" I asked. "Can it just be corrected?" "Legally, yes," Priyanka said. "We'd need a corrective deed, signed by you, transferring the property to whoever the two of you agree should hold it, back to Claire alone, or into joint ownership again, whichever you prefer. Given that the error is clearly documented in our files, this shouldn't be complicated or contested. I just recommend you two decide together how you actually want it held, since apparently that conversation didn't happen clearly enough the first time." I thanked her, hung up, and sat in my car in the same parking lot I seemed to keep returning to for difficult phone calls, and I thought about that last sentence for a long time. That conversation didn't happen clearly enough the first time. She meant it as a throwaway observation about legal paperwork, but it landed somewhere much deeper because it was true of practically everything between Claire and me regarding that house, going back years. We had never once sat down and had an honest conversation about what was fair. I had let her carry the weight because carrying it myself meant facing our mother's absence, and she had let me stay distant because that was easier than asking me to show up. We'd built an entire arrangement out of things neither of us said out loud, and it had taken a stranger's typo to finally force the unspoken into the open. I drove to the coast that weekend. I hadn't been back in 3 years, and the drive felt longer than 9 hours, though the clock said otherwise, every mile marker pulling something tighter in my chest, until I turned onto Gold Point Road and saw the cedar shingles, weathered to the same silver gray they'd always been, the same crooked mailbox our father had never quite managed to straighten after a storm bent it in 2009. Claire was on the porch when I pulled in, like she'd been watching for my car for an hour, which she probably had. We stood facing each other in the driveway for a second too long before either of us moved, and then she crossed the gravel and hugged me hard enough that I felt something in my own resistance finally give way. "I talked to Priyanka," I said, into her shoulder. "It was a filing error. A typo. She had it in your name, and somebody at the recording office swapped us." "I know," Claire said. "She called me too, right after you." She pulled back and looked at me, eyes red-rimmed but steady. "I need you to know, I never once thought you did this on purpose. I want to say that clearly out loud, because I don't think I said it clearly enough on the phone. I never thought my own sister stole a house out from under me. I thought the same about you," I admitted. "For about 4 days, if I'm honest. Not seriously. But it was there, in the back of my mind, and I hated that it was there." We sat on the porch steps together as the light went gold over the water, the way it used to when we were kids, and our mother would call us in for dinner just as the sky turned that exact color, and we finally had the conversation neither of us had ever managed to have properly. I told her how guilty I'd felt for 6 years, letting her manage everything alone while I stayed 9 hours away, hiding behind grief and a collapsing marriage as reasons I couldn't show up. She told me she'd never wanted to make me feel guilty, that she genuinely hadn't minded the day-to-day work of the house, but that what had worn her down wasn't the labor. It was feeling like she was carrying our mother's memory alone, with nobody to share it with, every single summer. "I didn't call about the taxes because of the money," she said quietly, watching the tide creep up the sand. "Not really. I called because I couldn't keep pretending I was okay holding all of this by myself. The house and mom and everything. I needed you to actually be in it with me again, even if that meant losing the house to do it." I told her we weren't losing the house. Not to strangers, not to a market listing, not to some family who'd never know what that screen door sounded like. We spent that weekend on the porch working out what neither piece of paper nor either parent had ever made us actually discuss. A real plan, put in writing this time, correctly this time, with our own names on it and our own understanding behind it. I signed the corrective deed the following week, transferring the property back into joint ownership, properly recorded, properly checked by both of us this time, instead of trusted blindly to someone else's office. We agreed to split the taxes and the maintenance costs genuinely evenly going forward, not the quiet, uneven arrangement we'd let stand for 6 years out of unspoken guilt and unspoken resentment. I agreed to come down 3 times a year instead of 0. Claire agreed to stop absorbing costs silently and just tell me, plainly, when something needed paying for. Denise never did come out for that valuation. Claire called her the following week to cancel the listing entirely, and when she told me about the call afterward, she said Denise had laughed, not unkindly, and told her that in 15 years of selling coastal property, this was the first time a clerical error had led to a family staying closer instead of falling apart over money. Usually, Denise had said, it goes the other way. I think about that a lot now. The version of this story where it went the other way, where the wrong name on a deed became a wedge instead of an accident, where 2 sisters who'd already spent years not quite saying the true things to each other let a lawyer's typo finish the job of driving them apart for good. It could have gone that way easily. We'd built exactly the kind of quiet, resentment-shaped distance that a shock like that could have shattered permanently instead of correcting. Instead, the house still stands on Gold Point Road, cedar shingles silvering a little more every year, screen doors still slapping the same way it always has. Claire's kids still learn to swim off the same dock I learned on. I go down now in June and October, as well as August, and last month I helped her repaint the trim, both of us up on ladders arguing cheerfully about whether the shutters had always been that particular shade of blue, or whether we were misremembering. The way you do with a house that's held so much of your life that the details start to blur into feeling instead of fact. The deed sits correctly filed now, both our names on it, exactly as it always should have been. But the paper was never really the thing that had gone missing between us. That took a stranger's mistake, and a very strange phone call from a realtor named Denise, to finally bring back out into the light.